The Detroit Lions are struggling with some injuries right now. Unfortunately, over the last couple of days, they have sustained some massive injuries to some major depth pieces, as well as some very unfortunate injuries to starting caliber players. Now, today, we're going to take a look at the injury reports, going to take a look at the injury bug that is currently biting the Detroit Lions, as well as some of the breaking news from training camp that we've been hearing about over the last 48 hours or so. We'll take a look at all of the players that have gone down with injuries, the timeline for their return, as well as what their impact may be if they do not return to the field very soon. But with that being said, let's kick it off and start off with some of the injuries sustained on Thursday Night Football when the Lions played the New York Giants. Now, Connor Galvin is the first player to have gone down with an injury this season, an MCL tear that is going to keep him out for the remainder of the 2024 season. And Connor Galvin was playing really well versus the Giants, played both left and right tackle for the Detroit Lions, allowed 0 sacks on the day, very few pressures, was great in pass protection, good in run blocking, and a player that very clearly took a step forward after spending the 2023 season on the practice squad. He was a player that I thought was good in the 2023 preseason a year ago, but a little too raw, a little too unpolished to make the final roster. But based off how he was playing, I thought that Connor Galvin had a really, really good shot of making the roster this season before the unfortunate MCL tear. He is a big player, reminds me a lot of Dan Skipper from just his size, his length, what he's able to do with that size and length. And I do think he's the eventual long-term option to that sixth man on the offensive line. But unfortunately, after this injury, he will unfortunately not be available for this season. Nate Lynn, a player that was phenomenal in the preseason debut, 5 pressures, 1 sack, 2 tackles, was unfortunately ruled out for the season with an ACL injury the day after the New York Giants game. In the following training camp practice, Nate Lynn went down with a knee injury. It came out a little bit later that it was an ACL tear, and he is officially done for the year. And after having a great training camp and after having really, really good day versus the Giants, again, 5 pressures and a sack, there was a good shot that Nate Lynn was going to make this roster. He was a standout pass rusher. He was good enough in the running game. He was adding constant pressure to that offensive line of the New York Giants, adding constant pressure to Tommy DeVito and Drew Lock, but unfortunately will not be available for the Detroit Lions to either put on the practice squad or the active roster. He is done for the 2024 year. And again, a player that might not have started for the Detroit Lions, might not have even played for the Detroit Lions, but would have been really, really solid depth had the Detroit Lions needed to have called upon it. Now, Hendon Hooker is in concussion protocol. He is far from done for the season. However, there is a chance that he does not play in the Week 2 matchup versus the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, he left the game after just his second drive of his NFL career, and he was having a pretty good game. He went 5 for 9 passing, 36 yards with 1 pass batted down, a couple of slight overthrows, but overall, I thought there was some encouraging signs from Hendon Hooker through the air, as well as 4 rushes for 34 yards, which led the team in both categories. He put up nearly 70 total yards of scrimmage on just really 1.5 drives of football. And I thought he looked really good. His ball placement was okay. It was a little off at times, but it was really good at times. He definitely has a bigger arm and better accuracies than Nate Sudfeld. He looked a little calmer, a little more athletic, a little bit more polished. And I thought that from the first showing against the Giants defense that, I think is genuinely pretty well coached, and last year I thought was pretty solid. I thought Hendon Hooker looked really good. There was some really good plays. There was some really encouraging plays. And I thought there was a lot of good to have taken away from Hendon Hooker's first preseason game, even through just a drive and a half. Now, Hendon Hooker may be back for Week 2. He may not. It depends on how bad the concussion is. It depends on how quickly he's able to recover. But this one is a little bit more encouraging. I think there was a lot more positives from Hendon Hooker than negatives. And I think that even with the concussion, I thought that Thursday was a good day for Hendon Hooker as opposed to a bad or negative setback. Now, Antoine Green also entered concussion protocol after taking a blindside hit while trying to block on a rushing play. Antoine Green was not only put on injured reserves, he was waived from the roster, meaning there's a good chance that he doesn't end up playing this year. Now, I don't want to speculate necessarily. I don't want to say for a fact that, this is the same injury that Tyrell Williams suffered his first year in Detroit or anything like that. But the fact that he was waived from the Detroit Lions and not just placed within concussion protocol is a really concerning thing, right? That means that this is more than, hey, it'll take a week or two to recover. That means it probably is more likely that he is not going to play in the 2024 season, and the Detroit Lions can't afford to keep him on the roster, which says a lot considering that he was second on the team in receptions through just 2 quarters of football, having 3 receptions for 13 yards. He was a big receiver. He was a fast receiver. He was a field stretcher, and he was working on becoming a little bit more consistent for this Detroit Lions offense. Unfortunately, now that will not happen. There is a chance that once he officially recovers from that concussion, he will return to the Detroit Lions active roster. But as of right now, Antoine Green is the second player ever to be drafted by Brad Holmes to be released or no longer with the Detroit Lions. It is actually a very, very sad story because obviously he was working really hard and was potentially going to be the Lions wide receiver 3 this year, but now unfortunately is no longer with a team and likely will not get signed until he is medically cleared by a professional. Now, taking a look at some of these starters, some of the bigger names that have been injured. Terrion Arnold left practice yesterday with an upper body injury, and after a preseason game where he was targeted 0 times on 9 routes defended, 3 of which were against Malik Neighbors, he was shut down. He was so tight in coverage. He was so good at the cornerback position, and unfortunately he went down with an upper body injury. Now, I can't tell you exactly what that upper body injury is, can't tell you exactly what the timeline looks like for his return. However, it seems pretty overwhelmingly unanimous, I would say, that he is not going to be out for a long stretch of time. He may not play another snap in the preseason, but it seems relatively likely that he will be ready for week 1, and not too many people seem to be worried about Terrion long term. Second round selection, Ennis Rakestraw also left practice yesterday with an ankle injury. He left practice a little bit early through 3 quarters of preseason football on Thursday. He allowed 0 yards and only 1 catch in his vicinity. He played really, really well. He was super physical, was great pressing off the line. He looked great as a boundary cornerback. Him, Arnold, as well as Robertson were a great trio in the preseason, not even considering the fact that Carlton Davis did not play. There was a ton of positives from the secondary, and I honestly thought Ennis Rakestraw, while being one of the highest graded players on PFF, was easily one of the most impressive players the Detroit Lions displayed on Thursday night. Jahmyr Gibbs left practice early with a hamstring injury. Again, this is something that we don't know the severity of. We don't know if this is going to affect him long-term, affect him week 1. A lot of people say that it probably won't. It might be a week, 2, maybe 3 weeks to recover, but should be okay by week 1 of the NFL season. And unfortunately, this tends to happen with some of the most explosive players in the NFL. They are too explosive for their muscles to handle sometimes, and they are going to hurt their hamstrings. They are going to, hurt themselves a little bit because they are that explosive and that dynamic of athletes. And it is really unfortunate he did not practice or did not play on Friday night's game versus the Giants, was not able to participate because, of course, he was a starter and they didn't play the starters. Don't know, again, the severity, but it is worthy of note that Jahmyr Gibbs is now down and likely will not play the preseason, but potentially could linger into the regular season as well. Now, couple of other pieces of news after the injury concerns. The Detroit Lions, as I mentioned, have officially waived Antoine Green. He is no longer with the Detroit roster. The wide receiving room got 1 man lesser, but they went out and they signed Jake Fromm, the former Georgia starting quarterback from 2017 to 2019, took the Georgia Bulldogs to the 2018 national championship. And while he's never had great NFL success, he was a pretty good quarterback at the University of Georgia, and I think is still leaps and bounds better than what we saw from Nate Sudfeld on Friday night. Now, Jake Fromm was a starter at Georgia for 3 years. He was drafted to Buffalo in the 5th round, moved to the Giants, where he actually started a couple of games for the Giants last season. Now, granted, he went 27 for 60 for 210 passing yards, 1 touchdown to 3 interceptions. And while that might not sound great, that might not sound very encouraging or very positive, he is not supposed to be the starting quarterback. He is not even being brought in to be the second quarterback. I still firmly believe that that is and should be Hendon Hooker, but with Hendon Hooker's uncertainty of playing in I believe, Saturday's game versus the Kansas City Chiefs, the Lions did need a backup quarterback, and they did need somebody to come in and compete for quarterback 3. And that is where I think that Jake Fromm will potentially make his name known. Now, the stats from Jake Fromm may look very poor, but comparing that to what we actually have currently in Nate Sudfeld, it actually looks okay, right? Nate Sudfeld, the last time he started and played in an actual regular season game was week 17 of the 2020 season, where the Philadelphia Eagles benched everybody in their last game of the season, and Nate Sudfeld got to play at the very end. Nate Sudfeld went 5 for 12 in, I believe, the second half of that football game, threw for 32 yards and an interception. In fact, his last game that he played ever, his preseason game on Saturday, he went 13 for 24, 96 yards, and an interception. He is not a starting caliber quarterback. He is not a backup caliber quarterback. He might not even be a third string caliber quarterback. At the very least, I think Jake Fromm comes in and presses Nate Sudfeld for that quarterback 3 role. I think we will see Nate Sudfeld start the game for the Detroit Lions, might even play 3 quarters for the Detroit Lions, but I would not be shocked if Jake Fromm outperformed him, even while getting less reps, even while being new to the offense. I think Jake Fromm has a little bit more confidence. I think he's able to spin the ball a little bit better. I think he is just a better overall quarterback than what Nate Sudfeld is. And while neither of them are going to be great, in fact, I don't think either of them are going to make the roster, I actually am a little bit excited to see Jake Fromm play for the Detroit Lions. I think he brings a little bit more than Nate Sudfeld does. And for the purposes of the preseason, it's really all a person could ask for. Now, getting into some positive news, James Houston, his role is being reduced. Now, while that might sound negative to start, I think this is the right move for James Houston's career. He is moving from Sam linebacker back to an edge rusher, and Dan Campbell basically said James Houston will either be setting the edge on every play or rushing the passer. And I think that is the best thing they can ask James Houston to do. I know that the Detroit Lions love versatility. If you are not a quarterback, you are expected to be able to play multiple positions. If you are a wide receiver, you are expected to be able to play on the boundary in the slot. If you were a tight end, you were expected to be able to block as well as catch the ball. If you were a running back, you were expected to be a good rusher, good receiver, and a good pass blocker. On the defensive side of the ball, in the secondary, you better be able to cover and you better be able to tackle and blitz. On the defensive line, you better be able to run, defend, rush the passer, and drop into coverage occasionally. The Lions love versatility and they love having different players that can do different things in their scheme. And unfortunately, that is not James Houston's game. James Houston is a pass rusher. James Houston is a guy that should go after the quarterback every single time he is on the field. And while I actually do think that this is going to hurt James Houston's ability to make the roster due to that lack of versatility, I actually think that this is the best move for James Houston's career, because with him being a full-time pass rusher, I think he is going to be far more productive on the field than he is as an off-ball linebacker. To his credit, despite being the lowest graded Pro Football Focus player that the Detroit Lions had on Saturday night's game, I actually thought that James Houston was a lot better at setting the edge. I thought he set the edge significantly better than he did his rookie and sophomore campaigns. So if he can do that better and still be the same caliber of pass rusher, I think his odds of making this team are still pretty good, because James Houston's whole thing of why he didn't get on the field in his first 2 years wasn't necessarily the lack of versatility. It was the lack of him being able to support in the run game. If he can do that even a little bit better, if he can set the edge even a tiny bit better than he did last season, I think he can have a larger role than he even did last year. And even if he doesn't, I think the pass rushing ability that he does bring on third down or obvious pass rushing situations is enough to keep him on the active roster. His contributions on special teams do not go unnoticed. His contributions as a pass rusher on third down do not go unnoticed. And while, yeah, he may not be an every down rusher, he may not be an early down rusher, he might only play 15 to 17 snaps a game, he's going to be a guy that gets you 2 to 3 pressures a game, might get you a sack a game for how explosive of a pass rusher that he is. And every time he does go after the passer, good things happen for the Detroit Lions. I just don't see them cutting James Houston because of how good he is as a rusher. So just because the Sam linebacker experiment is over, I don't think it means the end of James Houston with the Detroit Lions, especially if he plays really well in these next 2 preseason games as solely an edge rusher. Now, The safeties at training camp over the last couple of days have been great. Brian Branch is officially back. After not playing in OTAs, not playing in minicamp, not playing through training camp for the first couple of weeks, he is officially back, and he looks better than ever. Multiple pass breakups, multiple interceptions, multiple forced fumbles, and a big play almost every single time that he is in coverage. He is a phenomenal player. He might be the best player on the Detroit Lions defense. And right now, after coming back from that ankle injury, he is certainly playing like it. And he's not the only safety playing well, as Brandon Joseph has had a massive day at camp, having 2 interceptions yesterday off of Nate Sudfeld, a diving pass defended that almost ended in an interception, as well as the pick that he got off of Drew Lock in the New York Giants preseason game. He is a ball hawk. He has become, I think, a better tackler, although I still wouldn't consider that the strength of his game. He is a great coverage safety. He has incredible ball skills. He is a ball hawk, and I think he is cementing himself in that safety 4 role behind Ifeatu Melifonwu, Kirby Joseph, and Brian Branch. And considering the Lions ran 4 safety sets a season ago and love to run sets with 3 safeties on the field at a time, I think that they want quality depth for that safety position. And I think Brandon Joseph is one of the few players in that backup secondary that I think the Lions will trust to see playing time in 2024. And I think that he is almost nearly a cemented lock for this roster. Now, of course, injuries can happen. He can take a nosedive and start playing really poorly. But if he keeps up this pace and keeps playing like he is in camp, there's a really strong chance that Brandon Joseph makes the final 53-man roster. So with all of that being said, that is kind of the news and rumor updates. A lot of injuries, a lot of big, impactful injuries for right now, but a lot of injuries that should be rectified by week 1. Terrion Arnold should be back. Ennis Rakestraw should be back. Jahmyr Gibbs should be okay. Everything should be all right for the Detroit Lions starters. I haven't heard anything major about any of the injuries, but of course, the injuries do suck. It's impressive to see that some of the Lions players are starting to stand up, starting to, make some more plays in training camp. I think our safety room is really, really strong, and I think it'll be really interesting to see what the Lions do at the quarterback position. Dan Campbell's not stupid. Brad Holmes is not blind. They can see that Nate Sudfeld is not the answer, so it'll be interesting to see how much work that Jake Fromm gets on just a couple of days of preparation with the playbook, and really to see how well he can actually push Sudfeld for that third quarterback spot. But with all of that being said, that is all for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions on these roster moves, your opinions on these injuries, how worried you are about some of these players maybe not showing up for the Detroit Lions in the first couple of weeks of the NFL season. I'd be very curious what you guys have to say. But with all of that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. If you have yet to subscribe to the channel, please go down below and do so. But with that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.